President Obama wants to raise the minimum wage and press forward with immigration reform. Best-selling author and advisor to 3 presidents, Patrick Buchanan, will react. And the prayer journal of one of America's greatest writers was recently discovered. The editor of Flannery O'Connor's A Prayer Journal, and her friend, Bill Sessions, is here to discuss. And finally, Ave Maria Radio host and author Al Kresta sees dangers to the faith. He'll tell you what they are, plus a special cut-to-the-chase commentary. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Pat Buchanan, Bill Sessions, and Al Kresta are all straight ahead, as always. If you'd like to comment on tonight's program, send your tweets to Raymond Arroyo or drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com. Oh, we've got lots to get to, but first, here's the brief news from the world over this week. Another week of terrorist killings in Nigeria has left at least 99 dead. Suspected jihadists used explosives and heavy guns to attack a village and worshippers during Mass in the northeast part of the country. Hundreds of homes were razed as well, according to officials and witnesses. The attacks were among the deadliest since a military state of emergency was declared in the region 8 months ago. Boko Haram is believed to be behind the attacks. At a press conference after the killings, Cardinal John Onaiyekan said that the billions spent by the government to fight Boko Haram cannot solve the security problem. Rather, Nigerians need to understand the mentality of these terrorists who carry out their activities shouting Allah Akbar. He said, "We are wasting a lot of time if we do not recognize and do not address the religious aspect." And Christians continue to be the target of jihadist violence in Egypt. On Tuesday, a Coptic Orthodox church in Giza was shot in a drive-by attack. A policeman was killed, another was injured. The gunmen, who were later apprehended, are known Islamic extremists. Christians have been increasingly targeted since the June ouster of the Muslim Brotherhood-backed government. Meanwhile, al-Qaeda terrorists have claimed responsibility for the murder of a top Egyptian government minister. General Mohammed Said was shot outside his home in broad daylight on Tuesday. The purported killers accused him of being an apostate criminal. After getting a temporary reprieve by the U.S. Supreme Court, the Little Sisters of the Poor and 500 other plaintiffs are now preparing for the continuing court battle against President Obama's contraception mandate. The Little Sisters are leading a class action lawsuit of Catholic nonprofit organizations that receive health coverage through Christian Brothers Employment Benefit Services. This past week, the U.S. High Court granted the Little Sisters an injunction which forbade the Obama administration from enforcing the contraceptive requirement. Arguments in Denver's 10th Circuit Court of Appeals are set for February 24th. And the husband of a brain-dead and pregnant Texas woman has won his battle to remove his wife and preborn child from life support. A judge declined to uphold a state law that requires an incapacitated pregnant woman to remain on life support until her child can be delivered. The baby was at 23 weeks of gestation. In November, Marilis Munoz was found in her home unconscious by her husband, Eric, possibly due to a blood clot. Doctors had declared her brain dead, but the hospital kept her on life-sustaining treatment in accordance with Texas law. And the city of brotherly love is abuzz with the news that Pope Francis might be coming in 2015. Citing an unnamed church official, Vatican journalist John Allen at the National Catholic Reporter said last week that the Pope is considering a visit in September 2015 for the church-sponsored World Meeting of Families. Popes do not always attend these meetings. Pope Benedict XVI had chosen Philadelphia for the event and was planning to attend. That was, of course, before he stepped down as Roman pontiff. A spokesman for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia said nothing is official, but they are planning the event on the assumption that Pope Francis will be in attendance. We'll keep you posted. And Pope Francis has called on Catholic universities to support the teachings of the Church. His comments came during a meeting Thursday with officials from the University of Notre Dame. In offering praise for the university, the Pope added that Catholic universities are by their very nature, quote, committed to demonstrating the harmony of faith and reason and the relevance of the Christian message. For this reason, he continued, essential are the, quote, uncompromising witness of Catholic universities to the Church's moral teaching and the defense of her freedom, precisely in and through her institutions, to uphold that teaching as authoritatively proclaimed by the magisterium of her pastors, end quote. And the Vatican has announced that the Pope has begun work on what could become an encyclical. The topic, ecology. Spokesman Father Federico Lombardi said that the Pope intends to put particular emphasis on the theme of human ecology, a phrase used by Pope Benedict to describe not only how people must defend and respect nature, but how nature of the person, masculine and feminine, as created by God, must also be defended. For his part, Pope Francis has frequently lamented today's wasteful culture. In his homily at his March 19th inaugural Mass, he called for the faithful to protect creation and God's plan inscribed in nature. Father Lombardi said the document was still in the early stages and that no publication date has been set. And 3 men have been charged with stealing a priceless relic of Blessed John Paul II, taken from a small northern Italian church. Local police say that the relic, a bit of blood-stained cloth kept inside a painted metal cross, was snatched last Saturday. After an extensive search, the police found the reliquary, but the relic itself remains missing. 2 of the 3 alleged robbers are said to be drug addicts who might have thrown the relic out, according to the ANSA news agency. They can't remember where. The blood on the relic was shed by Pope John Paul II during a 1981 assassination attempt on his life. Cardinal Stanislaw Dziwisz, John Paul's former secretary, donated the relic to the church in Abruzzo, where John Paul often celebrated Mass during hiking and skiing visits to the area. When we return, what is the state of America's union and the international implications? President Obama offered his appraisal this week. Pat Buchanan reacts when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
But America does not stand still, and neither will I. So wherever and whenever I can take steps without legislation to expand opportunity for more American families, that's what I'm going to do.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. The annual State of the Union address was offered by President Obama earlier this week at the Capitol. In its wake, Congress is debating raising the minimum wage, immigration reform, and a nuclear pact with Iran. To put it all in context, we're joined by syndicated columnist, former presidential candidate, and author of the book Suicide of a Superpower, Patrick J. Buchanan. Pat, welcome back to the show.
Good to see
Great
you,
to see you.
Raymond.
Now, I want to jump in, first of all, what do you make of the breezy tone? The president was awfully friendly, I thought, and almost lighthearted in the way he offered this State of the Union. It wasn't acrimonious or mean.
Not at all. And I thought it was very effective from his standpoint. Everyone said he's going to be in their face. He's going to say, I've got my pen and I've got my phone. And he did say that, in effect. But I thought he deliberately was very friendly in some of those issues you mentioned. Immigration, if he goes for half a loaf, if you take the minimum wage, if he goes, say, for $1.50 an hour raising it, he can really put the Republican Party on the spot, and he can split it right down the middle.
Let's talk about some of these issues. I want to play this bite for you. This is the president talking about minimum wage. Roll it.
In the coming weeks, I will issue an executive order requiring federal contractors to pay their federally funded employees a fair wage of at least $10.10 an hour, because if you cook our troops' meals or wash their dishes, you should not have to live in poverty.
Pat, are you concerned about this expansion of executive power?
No, I'm not. I don't think he can do really major things. Secondly, the country, quite frankly, is not all that worried about Congress being dissed. The congressional respect is down to 13% approval. The congressmen sound to me like they're whining a little bit. What does he say he's going to do on federal contracts? He's going to demand $10 an hour minimum wage. It's scarcely terrifying.
Now, you know, when I listened to this, I was thinking, this has a Buchananite ring to it, actually. When you were running for president, you went out to the workers and you were talking about justice for these workers and how they were being taken advantage of by the situation they found themselves in. Is there something here that the president's tapping into that perhaps conservatives, Republicans, have failed to acknowledge or see?
It's not only Republicans have failed to acknowledge or see. Two decisions the Republicans made. We're going into globalization where we shut down all our factories here and move them to China and Asia. That's one side of it. The second side is mass immigration to the United States. Tens of millions of people coming in here, hardworking people, driving down the wages of middle America. That's what killed the Republican majority, the new majority. And I think that Obama is touching on it to a degree when he's talking about raising the minimum wage.
He talks about inequality as well. This seems to be a theme that will run right into the midterms. A good strategy?
Well, I think it is. It's got a good sound to it. But I will say this. I prefer what Reagan's strategy was basically, which was, look, a floor of decency under every family, but no roof over any man's head. It's almost Huey Long, every man a king.
It does. It has that ring to it.
But that seems to me better. The inequality thing, that gets into, if you will, neo-Marxism. The most equal society, I think, in modern times have been Mao's China and Pol Pot's Cambodia. Inequality is a direct consequence of freedom.
Let's talk for a moment about the long-term unemployment that we're seeing now. According to the Washington Post, long-term unemployment is above the pre-recession high of 41 states. 37% of the unemployed people are long-term unemployed. Shouldn't that trouble us?
I think it should trouble us, but I do believe this. I think this is a permanent condition, and there's one of the reasons for it is the safety net has become something of a hammock. You can get folks who can earn, say, $20,000 or $15,000 a year, free food stamps, free housing, free medical care, children educated in public schools, K through 12, school lunches, Pell Grants. This huge panoply, I think there's something like 70 welfare programs or benefit programs. And you can survive and live decently on these, and for a lot of folks, they're going to say it's far better than giving up some of these benefits and going out working for $7.50 an hour or $10 an hour.
Now, some say if you raise the minimum wage, Pat, it's going to suppress the number of people that can be employed. It's going to drive jobs away. You'd say what?
I'd say that there's no question about it. At $10 an hour, there are some workers out there, let's take minority teenagers who are got a tremendous unemployment rate. Very few people are going to hire them for $10 an hour. What that will do, in my judgment, that will be a magnet to hardworking people in Central America and Mexico. I mean, take $10.10 an hour. That's over $21,000 a year, I believe. I mean, that is more than the median income in most of the countries of the world. That will be a tremendous magnet for hardworking, mature people who will come and get these kinds of jobs here in the United States.
Let's move to the next issue, and this is a good segue to it. The president spoke about immigration reform. Roll that.
Independent economists say immigration reform will grow our economy and shrink our deficits by almost $1 trillion in the next 2 decades. And for good reason. When people come here to fulfill their dreams, to study, invent, contribute to our culture, they make our country a more attractive place for businesses to locate and create jobs for everybody. So let's get immigration reform done this year.
Pat, last year the GOP had a problem getting this off the ground. Of course, the Catholic bishops are supporting immigration reform. Now the GOP, in the middle of their retreat, have released a list of standards for immigration reform. I want to run through these and get your reaction. Admit culpability. In other words, illegals would have to admit culpability. Yeah, that's right. I'm here without papers. Pass rigorous background checks, pay fines and back taxes, develop proficiency in English, be able to support themselves and their families. And the GOP says it will not negotiate with the Senate on a compromise bill, and that two things need to happen: biometric tracking system and E-Verify before anything else. Your thoughts on this plan?
I think the Republican Party is about to capitulate. I mean, some of those things seem to me, they're not going to follow through on background checks on 11 or 12 million people who came here from all over the world and from Mexico. I think what the Republican Party is going to do is going to capitulate. They're going to go for the DREAM Act. These are the kids who were brought here fairly young by their parents and who now have a clean record. They're in the military, in college. I think they will put them on a path to citizenship, and it will be a massive grant of amnesty to 11 to 12 million people. And I think it's a total capitulation by the Republican Party. Now, will mass immigration grow the economy and GDP? Of course. If we double the size of our population from 300 million to 600 million, GDP will grow. Will it diminish the deficit? No, because as the Heritage Foundation pointed out a couple of years ago, taking an illegal alien come in or some of the poor person come into the country consumes $30,000 worth of various government services and benefits and pays $10,000 in taxes.
What about this question of family reunification? The bishops have placed great emphasis on this. Even Mike Huckabee the other day said, you don't punish the kid for what the parent did. The parent may have broken the law, but the kid didn't, and he or she deserves a future. You'd say what?
Well, if the father came into this country and abandoned his family, he ought to go back and be with his family. I don't think the bishops would agree with that.
I doubt if they would, Pat.
But no, this is, look, I mean, many of these families, and they have extended families, and they come in, you get whole villages here. Look, I know it's a tough decision, but the question is, can the United States continue to bring in 1 million hard-working people into this country every year when you got this enormous number of 20 million unemployed, underemployed, and have dropped out of the labor force? What are you doing to those people's future when you're offering these people a new future? And what's your first responsibility? To me, it's always been to your own family. And I think we have really damaged the American family. And an awful lot of people have been, as you pointed out, have been dropped out for good from the labor force.
It's an interesting combination here of forces. You've got union folks and big business coming together around this plan. And one of the things that people have said to me is, what about the dignity of these people? The people coming in, the immigrants coming in, aren't you consigning them essentially to lower wages that will not be brought up because they will be working for less than an American citizen, and perhaps a perpetual existence stuck in that part of the economy?
Well, you know, I don't know if that's the main problem, to be honest. I can understand what Rich Trump is doing. He wants to bring them in, legalize them, and bring them in unions, say the Service Workers International Union, something like that. Empower these unions, and if you get a minimum wage in the United States, as I say, $10 an hour is $21,000 a year, and you're eligible for all these other programs. It is not a hellish existence. But on the other hand, there's no question that some of them now, because they are illegal, they're able to be exploited.
Let's go on to this talk of a deal with Iran. The president brought this up. I want you to hear this, and then let's talk about it.
As we gather here tonight, Iran has begun to eliminate its stockpile of higher levels of enriched uranium. It's not installing advanced centrifuges. Unprecedented inspections help the world verify every day that Iran is not building a bomb. And with our allies and partners, we're engaged in negotiations to see if we can peacefully achieve a goal we all share: preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. The sanctions that we put in place help make this opportunity possible. But let me be clear. If this Congress sends me a new sanctions bill now that threatens to derail these talks, I will veto it.
Pat, your reaction. Sanctions, we hear a lot of talk on Capitol Hill, particularly from GOP. Even some Democratic members say the sanctions should be tougher.
There's all but 2 United States senators have voted to toughen the sanctions. 59 senators in all have voted. It's almost a filibuster-proof majority. I am with Obama 100% here for this reason. Not only Ayatollah says he doesn't have a bomb, is not building one, not only Rouhani, 16 U.S. intelligence agencies, all of them say Iran does not now have a bomb program and Iran does not now have a bomb. I don't think Iran is driving toward a bomb. They have a nuclear bomb capability because they got centrifuges.
Right.
I think they are going to prove they are willing to demonstrate that they don't have a bomb or a bomb program, and that their program is a year or 2 years away from a bomb. I think they're going to accept all these things. This is one where I think the president is correct, and I think we're going to get a deal. The question is, are the folks on Capitol Hill and the folks pushing them, frankly, the Israelis, the Israeli lobby, the war lobby in Washington, D.C., many hawks on Iran, they want more sanctions, they want more confrontation, and some of them want a war. But I think we can win this battle because I don't think Iran wants a war. And I think they realize that getting a bomb is going to put them in a box with North Korea.
And Pat Buchanan believes and trusts that you can deal with these Iranian leaders.
It's not deal with. I think you can get guarantees on all of their nuclear programs, get people in there. I can stop all enrichment to 20%, keep it at 3.5%, have people in Iraq. They can't build a reprocessing plant. We know how to stop them or keep them a year or 2 years or 3 years away from a bomb. And if the U.S., if it's good enough for General Clapper, it's good enough for me.
Let's talk about the GOP frontrunners. Great line, Pat. That's why you were the speechwriter for so many presidents. GOP frontrunners, we had a new poll this week, and that public policy polling has come out with this list. Huckabee is topping the list at 16%.
Right.
Then Jeb Bush at 14%, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie at 13%. This is awfully early, but does this tell us anything?
Yes, it does. I think Mike Huckabee, there is a social conservative, populist conservative base out there. He did very well in Iowa. I think he ran number 2 in 2008. I've seen it there always, and he would be a real problem for Rick Santorum because I think he would occupy that terrain and Rick Santorum would peel off some of his people. The name not mentioned there, Rand Paul.
Right.
There's a real move there in the country toward libertarianism on a lot of issues. Foreign policy, certainly what I just described, that has a size in the Republican Party. And so I think he's going to be competitive. I'm not sure about Jeb Bush, to be honest. I thought the other day, suppose his name were Jeb Burns. And he hadn't won an election since 2002. Would he be considered for president? I don't think so. He's very competent and able, but I think he's going to be running on his name.
Now, the matchup between Hillary Clinton and Chris Christie is basically a dead heat. Christie has fallen off. Kristen has fallen off a little bit in the last few weeks because of this Bridgegate scandal. Your take on that matchup and Hillary Clinton versus any of these men? I
think Chris Christie is going to have to. I don't think he can get well on this issue, even if it's not demonstrated that he knew about it or ordered it or in any way. If he was in on the know on that, he's finished. But I don't know that his persona was fit for Iowa and New Hampshire. I mean, excuse me, somewhat for New Hampshire and South Carolina. Secondly, everywhere he goes now, this is what's going to be talked about. This is what he's associated with in the minds of most Americans now. I think before the election, before this problem, at the bridge, he would have been competitive. Right now, I don't think anyone right now could beat Hillary Clinton, except, as a friend said, Hillary Clinton. However, let me tell you, if I were a 40-year-old Democratic senator and I saw those numbers there that kept everybody else out of the race, that is the time to step in, run a positive campaign, competitive feud. Let's turn the page. The Clintons were wonderful. That's 1990s. Let's move on here, here, and here. And really do yourself well, even if you lost. And I think there's a possibility you could do extremely well.
Do you see anybody like that?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I don't see anyone. I mean, someone's got to rise up and do this, Yeah.
I want to shift gears very quickly to the Super Bowl. The American atheists have placed an ad, a digital ad, outside the arena in the Meadowlands where the Super Bowl will be played. It reads, "A Hail Mary only works in football. Enjoy the game," and it's a priest with a football in his arms. Your reaction to that?
I think it's a customary insult from the atheists who are trying to get attention. It's one of the only ways they can. They're a very small group and not terribly popular, and with good reason. And so I'll go with Peyton Manning over the atheists.
Oh, okay. And you've already jumped to my next question. Who do you pick here, Seattle or Denver?
I've got to go with. I really like Peyton Manning. I must say.
I like him too.
I thought he was. I think that Brady. I admire tremendously, but that is a machine, you know. Brady is, I think Brady's one of the greatest quarterbacks that ever lived. He's unbelievable.
I'm going to reserve the Who-Dat privilege here and reserve a little space for Drew Brees, and since he's not playing, I like Peyton Manning too.
Yeah, that's why I'm going for Denver.
Okay, you see, I love Peyton Manning, but I think in my heart, Seattle's going to win this thing.
Seattle's awfully tough.
They're awful, and in bad weather, as the Saints learned, they can be awfully
Richard
formidable.
Sherman's a pretty bad guy. He can do well in bad weather.
Pat Buchanan, enjoy the Super Bowl. Thank you for coming here. Pat's next opus, Greatest Comeback, How Richard Nixon Rose from the Dead to Create America's New Majority, will be out in July, and we'll have you back to talk about that, if not sooner. When we return, a glimpse into the mind and faith of a young artist, a prayer journal by Flannery O'Connor. The editor and Flannery O'Connor's authorized biographer, Bill Sessions, is here to tell us how he discovered this remarkable treasure. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. In the late 1940s, the esteemed Southern author Flannery O'Connor was just beginning as a creative writing student at the Iowa Writers' Workshop. The 21-year-old had yet to make a name for herself in the literary world, but she had begun a journal, a prayer journal, in which she recorded her pleas to God and thoughts on her Catholic faith. The journal was uncovered only recently by O'Connor's friend and our guest tonight. He's a professor emeritus of English at Georgia State, Flannery O'Connor's official biographer and editor of the new book, A Prayer Journal. William Sessions joins us via satellite from Atlanta. Mr. Sessions, thanks for being here.
Sure.
Tell me, how did you meet Flannery O'Connor? How did you come to know her?
Well, we both wrote reviews for the Archdiocesan Bulletin, our paper, which was hardly more than Xerox sheets. But the great thing was, as Flannery would say, we get free books. So we could order very involved books by Bernanos or by whatever. They just send them to us.
Right.
And then we could write paragraphs of reviews. But we got wonderful books. So I wrote a review of Guardini, the German theologian, The Lord, and she liked it very much. She wrote one of about Caroline Gordon, whom I had known. And so I wrote to her, and she said, come on down to see me. So I was teaching at a college there near Atlanta in western Georgia, and I drove down to Andalusia and came up to her house and walked up those stock steps to the front door, and she stood in the door with her, pushed the door open with her cane and stared at me with deep blue eyes. And then once she had got you, so to speak, she said, come on in. And so I came in on the front porch, and I sat in the hammock, and she sat in one of those big white chairs. Wow. And that was in 1956, and I was in my very mid-20s, and she was a little older than I. And then I knew her completely until she died in 1964. In fact, I saw her in the hospital about a few weeks before she died. And so she was a very lovely person, very funny. And
what an incredible artist.
Tell.
Now, you have been commissioned to write her biography. I know you've been working on it for a number of years. It is completed, correct?
It's finished, and I sent it to my agent in New York, Ben Camardi, and he's got it out, and it's being looked at. And
good.
I've reduced it as much as I can, but I wanted it to be as wide as possible because I want to have a broad canvas for everybody to take.
Now, while you were researching, I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't want to run out of time. While you were researching the biography, you came across this prayer journal. It was in a little sterling notebook. Tell me about that and how you came across this.
Well, it was in a metal box they brought with a lot of manuscripts, and then I picked it up to look at, and almost immediately after I got into it, I knew this thing had to be published. And I had some doubts about starting the biography. I refused for about a year, but after I'd been through that material and some other manuscripts, I realized that this would be the thing to do, that everything needed to be out. And so I kept it for a while, and then I was able to read it in a conference in Chicago, and the audience liked it very much. And it has been an utter surprise to me, the trajectory of this work. I mean, from this praise in the New Republic, it's excerpting in the New Yorker. These are not things you expect a prayer journal to be doing.
Yeah, and they are
so
pretty...
it was...
These are such gorgeous, intense prayers, and I just want to share one and get your reaction to it, get you to explain it a bit to people. She says at one point, remember, this is a 21-year-old girl, almost 22 when she finishes, please help me, dear God, to be a good writer and to get something else accepted, she writes. This is so far from what I deserve, of course, that I am naturally struck with the nerve of it. And later she writes, oh God, please make my mind clear. Please make it clean. And don't let me ever think, dear God, that I was anything but an instrument for your story. What does this tell us about Flannery O'Connor, the artist and the Catholic?
Well, she had tremendous a vocation to love God. This had come about after the death of her father and a variety of things, and that she never lost. And this was her life in Iowa had brought her many influences from a variety of ways, and this proceeded to intensify her. It's amazing in this journal that it's very personal, very intimate, but then she talks about Proust, Freud, D.H. Lawrence, all of this. In other words, it has a sophistication as well as being extremely intimate in what she was saying and doing. And it has a gnome-like or a wisdom kind of flavor that you could, as you read many of the passages, and I suspect that this is what has drawn a lot of people. Is the main thing is she came from her own religious position, ideological if you want, and then moved out into something very universal, so that in the work, people from every religion have read it and have moved into it. There's an intensity, an elegant intensity, and a real vibrancy about it.
It feels so immediate, like it was written yesterday. At one point, you said, you quoted her during a speech I came across the other day, and you said, it takes a story to make a story. Readers should see the hand of God and his descent in these stories. How did her life reflect her Gothic, at times bizarre, violent stories?
Well, her life was really comparatively mild. Andrew Lytle, who was one of the agrarians, said a great thing. He said her imagination was enormous. And Lytle, who was at the Sewanee Review, part of the agrarians, friend of Alan Tate, Robert Penwine, all of these, had a wonderful things. He said Flannery O'Connor could walk by a pool hall, take a look in, smell the thing, and then write a wonderful story. In other words, she didn't need the experience so much as she had the sense of getting to the depth of things and to see how things could work. And I think this is one of the great qualities of the prayer journal. Marilyn Robertson, who reviewed it for the New York Times Book Review, pointed out, and she said, which I thought was very important, she said, O'Connor's journal is as eloquent on the subject of creativity as it is on the subject of prayer. The prose is absolutely brilliant, sentence by sentence, simile by simile, relentlessly inventive. And I think that helps to do this. Now, why is this? Because she had an absolute, total belief in the existence of God and the whole sense of her devotion that she went through every day. And of course, after she came down with her disease of lupus, she had enormous pain every day too. So it was amazing, in fact, what she did in the 14 years she had left after she came out of her and learned she had the illness.
No, she creates an enormous amount of material during those years, the essays and the novels and all the beautiful short stories that endure today.
Yeah, but have tremendous influence. Bruce Springsteen said for his second album, he said it was because of her. Tommy Lee Jones has told his people, before you get into No Place for Old Men, whatever that title is, that you read two things, Isaiah and Flannery O'Connor. So, I mean, the enormous influence that she's had, and one of the episodes of Lost, I think the last episode, they focus in on a guy who's waiting outside of a station of some kind, and what is he reading? Everything that rises must converge.
Yeah, I remember that. That was amazing. You know, I want to talk for a moment about one of my favorite novels, The Violent Bear It Away. Now, many people read this, and, you know, this is a pretty intense story. You've got a guy being raised by what on the surface appears to be a madman possessed by God. He believes himself a prophet, and he dies. The kid has to bury him, and then the kid goes out to seek his fortune in the world and sort of become the prophet that his Uncle Tarwater imagined him to be. Explain to people, if you could, that almost visceral, violent sense that many of these stories possess, and what she was doing with that. She said at one point that there's an aspect of eternity that should be in all good stories. Explain how you reconcile that aspect with eternity with the extreme violence at times in these stories.
Well, I think in The Violent Bear It Away, that she's already come to that point. That is, the boy recognizes finally that he must go back to the city, and he must just be prepared to die or whatever he's going to have to do. But that's his mission. And I think that has come through trying to run away from it and yet being forced back into it. The quintessential story, as you know very well, the archetypal story is the misfit. That is, a good man is hard to find.
Yeah.
And that's a story that focuses the misfit, and I think in many ways he becomes the character that everyone will imitate, from many other Southern writers to many television shows and everything else. The man who is inherently disturbed but cannot believe in God, and therefore must kill, must be violent, and the whole story is on that level. But in The Violent Bear It Away, there is hope. The boy becomes a young man who goes back to the city and will try to redeem it. Flannery's last stories, there were three, a kind of triptych, Revelation, Parker's Back, and Judgment Day, are finally, I think, a marvelous point at which violence becomes integrated. That's in her last book, Everything That Rises Must Converge. And that title, which she got from Teilhard de Chardin, is part of the renewal that she finds in life, and that is powerful. But it doesn't come except at a cost.
Yeah. No, her influence is truly remarkable, and how she's endured all these years. I know Good Country Pictures is working on a film version of The Violent Bear It Away that is exceptional. I read a script, an early script. I want to move on, and you just mentioned something about sacrifice and how important that is, and that becomes a pathway in some ways to grace. In this prayer journal, she pleads so earnestly, repeatedly, please let me be an instrument, please let me win people for you, please make me a great writer, allow me to do what I'm fashioned to do. She almost consecrates herself, she does in fact, to God to do this work. 3 years after that, she's diagnosed with lupus. Was that the answer to her prayer in some ways?
Well, this is, I make that point in my introduction, which is that she does say specifically, I don't want pain, I'm afraid of pain, I don't like pain. But I point out that at the end of my introduction, yes, 3 years later, she came down with this disease of lupus, which her father had, but she wasn't supposed to have. And it was dreadful, and brought her in enormous pain, and the greatest pain of all being that she was starting her writing career, and she didn't know she could do anything. But the point is that the prayers were answered. She did become a great American writer, or a very important American writer, and she then also was given the pain, which was for her a way of loving God more. So the prayer journal is a remarkable work, I think, because you have, as a wonderful critic in Toronto said, it's the beginning of her life, and it sets it up. In fact, while she was writing the prayer journal, she began her first novel, Wise Blood. And John Huston's Wise Blood, as you know, is a classic film. There are plenty of people who are not even slightly interested in religion, who find this a very important film itself. And it's an important work. The thing that's amazing, and Bob Giroux, who was one of the editors at Farrar Giroux, who was Lowell's editor, Elizabeth Bishop's, T.S. Eliot, you can name them all. But he said to me before he died at 93, he said, she grew. And they were all amazed at how she grew. And I think that's a very good sign for Flannery's future. Elizabeth Bishop said in her obituary that Flannery O'Connor's work will last as long as American literature lasts, and it has already become anthologized.
You have certainly perpetuated her vision. We are so looking forward to your biography. We thank you for this. A Prayer Journal by Flannery O'Connor, edited by William Sessions. It's available at bookstores everywhere. It's online. It's wonderful, enlightening for writers or anyone who appreciates fine writing. It really is such a gift, and I would recommend it to you. When we return, my next guest says faith is under attack, and he's assembled a list of the main opponents. Ave Maria Radio host and author Al Kresta joins us when The World Over Live continues, and I'll give you my take on that Rolling Stone papal cover story. I wish it were as nice as the picture. Stay with us.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest is a well-known Catholic journalist and broadcaster. As host of Kresta in the Afternoon, he's heard on over 220 stations nationwide, as well as Sirius Radio. He is also the author of the new book, Dangers to the Faith, Recognizing Catholicism's 21st Century Opponents. He joined me recently here in our D.C. studio to discuss. Here's my conversation with Al Kresta. Now, Al, on these pages in the new book, Dangers to the Faith, Recognizing Catholicism's 21st Century Opponents, you sort of look across the cultural landscape at the various opponents of the Church. What is the common denominator, if there is one, that motivates these enemies of the Church?
Abuse of goods. These are abusers of spirituality and revelation. They are abusers of science and reason. They are abusers of the past and the future. And they are abusers of power and wealth. They take goods and they abuse them. I think, for instance, here of somebody like Richard Dawkins, the celebrity atheist, who at one time was a pretty serious zoologist, no longer. Now he's a celebrity atheist. But what he does is he takes the great goods of science and he tries to enlist them in support of an atheistic regime.
What do you think? You mention in the course of the book that Catholics are ill-prepared to discuss or defend their faith. Given the fact that we've just marched through two pontificates of fairly hefty theological and philosophical minds that have laid out this bounty of teaching, why, in the light after the shadow of the new evangelization, why are they so ill-prepared? Why are we only having 20% mass attendance? Isn't that a problem?
It's a huge problem, and it may. All I can say is the hay hasn't gotten down off the loft where the horses can eat it yet. What we have to do, there's a disconnect between the truly magnificent teaching of John Paul II and Benedict XVI, and I assume as we go on, Francis as well, a huge gap between their thinking and the rest of the Church's doing. There's some disconnect, and I don't know enough about the way the hierarchy is structured, but it doesn't. Look at most parishes. I venture to say 80% of priests in America have not mastered any of the papal encyclicals.
80%?
That's my guess.
Wow.
Take it with a grain of salt, but I mean.
And do you think Francis might be an instrument to taking that hay, if you will, down to the horses so they can feed on it? Is that what we're seeing?
I think that's what he wants to do. That's what he's trying to do. That's why he's such a street level kind of guy. We had, when he began giving those interviews, people were saying, what the heck is he saying?
Right.
And because we've been accustomed to popes that write encyclicals, John Paul II, a professional philosopher. You have Benedict, really probably the greatest biblical theologian to ever sit on the chair of Peter. But here we have Francis, who comes along and grants chatty interviews. There's no hermeneutic. There's no interpretive scheme. How do you interpret chatty interviews? We're listening to his interviews as though he's speaking with the authority of an encyclical, and he wasn't.
No, he isn't. No, he isn't. And we're still awaiting. Well, he did have the one encyclical that he kind of co-wrote with Benedict. Right. But we're waiting for the real, full solo encyclical of Pope Francis.
That's
so we'll
right.
see.
That's right.
In the book, you identify a series of enemies of the church, what you describe as enemies of the church. New Ageism is mentioned
That's
here.
right.
Many people think, and I'm a bit accepting of the view, that the New Age thing is sort of played out and has moved away. You seem to take the perspective that it has found a different guise.
Oh, yeah.
And it's wrapped in sort of nice secular clothing, but it's the same routine.
You're exactly right. People think the New Age with all of its crystals and Shirley MacLaine craziness is gone. It's not
and the
true.
thing and the Eastern yogis and all of that.
Oprah is the best example of what happened to New Age thought. She herself would never say she's New Age in her thinking, but she's involved with groups like the Unity School and New Thought, which are all come out of what we would call the New Age movement of the 19th century, and have been very influential up to this day. So it's the idea there is that Jesus is to be separate from the Christ. We are all called to develop a Christ consciousness. Jesus was just another human being like us who, through his own meditation, prayer, obedience, whatever, he developed his own Christ consciousness, and he became a way shower for us.
One of the interesting chapters in this book is on consumerism. It is something that every time I loathe going to the mall because you see this herd, particularly when they have big sales, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, and the Christmas lead up. It is like inhuman, and it's like a zombie shopping experience, these people. Literally knifing, stabbing, tasering each other to get to these sales. What has consumerism done to people, to their souls, to their sense of self?
Yeah. This is a topic which John Paul II and Benedict both wrote very eloquently on.
And Francis, most recently.
Francis, of course, is really championing it. But it's a topic, though, that I think most Catholics haven't come to grips with yet, because it's not really it's not presented as a false philosophy or false doctrine that we can correct.
Yeah.
What it is, it's a way of thinking about what you value. I think the effect of consumerism on American Christians, for instance, people believe, most American Christians will change their church 6, 7, 8 times in their life. They look upon church attendance and church association as a consumer item. They look for churches that prepare certain goods. I like the preaching, the aisles are wider there, I can get down, the kids have a cleaner gym, they have a better program. So they, even when it comes to spirituality, they think in terms of cost-benefit analysis. I mean, they're not that crass about it, but that's what's functioning there. And this is why you see so much movement from one denomination to the next among American Christians. Consumerism is that false belief that we can form ourselves and our identity through the things that we purchase or the objects that we identify with.
It's one of the things I loved about, I don't know if you'll agree with me, The Sopranos, the old Sopranos show on HBO. It was really a meditation on consumerism and how things and the attainment of things bring nothing but despair, and you see these lives crumbling and falling apart. And it really is, it was a precursor to, I think, what we're really sliding into now. And you see it as you walk through the streets, and it is terrifying. And it's the branding, the commodifying, the branding of the heart you talk about in the book. Tell me about that quickly.
Branding of the heart, it's a way people identify themselves by how they are perceived by others. And they are perceived by others through very superficial imagery. People, for instance, now they can purchase almost automatically online through their cell phones. They can enjoy concerts anytime, day or night. They can surround themselves by all the news programs that they tend to agree with. They don't have to come into contact with people with whom they disagree. They can really wrap themselves up into an electronic cocoon and then kind of color it the way they want it to be. I do think that it's really the most dangerous, it may well be the most dangerous spiritual attack on us today.
You credit in the opening of the book a certain nun residing in Alabama.
Yes, that's right.
For sort of holding the line. Why did you take the time to mention her at the top of this?
I think there's no doubt about it, looking over the history of American Catholicism, that Mother Angelica represents a turning point in especially post-Vatican II American Catholicism. She knew, and you know her much better than I do, but she knew that America was suffering from a deficit of teaching in catechesis. She was a champion of what I call remedial catechesis. She knew adults needed to be trained, and she went at it with full power, and she empowered lots of other people to do it. And that's something which we haven't seen the full fruit of that yet, but it will be, when the history books are written, her EWTN will be seen as a turning point in the history of American Catholicism.
No. The history book has been written, but we'll talk about that later.
The biography has been written.
The biography
has been
written. But the thing I love about it is she created, you're right, an international platform to teach. But I would argue, one of the things she also did that was so crucial and missing in large part today, she popularized and made it fun, cool, and what Frances is doing. She made it accessible in a new way that no one before, and I would argue since, has really been able to capture. Her joy is something absolutely lacking in the church today, and her sense of fun. And there was no one more fun than Mother Angelica. Al Kresta's latest book, Dangers to the Faith, Recognizing Catholicism's 21st Century Opponents, from our Sunday Visitor, is available at bookstores everywhere, online, and of course through EWTN's religious catalog. And Al can be heard on Kresta in the afternoon on your favorite EWTN affiliate. Now, before we go, let's cut to the chase. The latest edition of Rolling Stone features a cover story of some note. No, you won't find Daft Punk or Katy Perry there, but Pope Francis. Now, why the Pope is on the cover of a pop music magazine is not entirely clear. But if Papa wasn't a Rolling Stone, at least he has now appeared on it. For the Pope and the Church, this is a good thing, at least on the surface. Pope Francis is in the middle of the pop culture, and even non-Catholics are taking notice. The problem is not the cover, but the story behind it. It's riddled with the same cliches and facile analysis that fill too many papal profiles. So perhaps Mark Benelli can be forgiven for echoing what's been repeatedly written since last March. Mainly, Francis pays his own bills, he kisses babies, he calls people on the phone, he drives a really little car, no papal palace for him, he smiles, and he launched a gentle revolution. Okay. To anyone who's followed the last three papacies with any attention, all of them kissed babies, they smiled, lived modestly, made phone calls, and each launched their own revolutions. The only difference is the wider media either wasn't paying attention or they weren't born yet. Whatever the case, it doesn't change reality. The piece lauds Francis's, quote, scathing critique of unchecked free market capitalism. Now note here, John Paul II and Benedict issued the same critique. And the author loves Francis's, quote, publicly scolding church leaders for being obsessed with divisive social issues like gay marriage, birth control, and abortion. He omits Pope Francis's own blunt comments about gay marriage, birth control, and abortion, but I digress. Later, Mr. Benelli goes on to boost Pope Francis at the expense of Benedict XVI. At one point, he even equates Pope Benedict with the horror film monster Freddy Krueger. Quote, "After the disastrous papacy of Benedict, a staunch traditionalist who looked like he should be wearing a striped shirt with knifed finger gloves and menacing teenagers in their nightmares." You get the picture. As Father Federico Lombardi said this week, I'll paraphrase, "It's nice that the author likes Pope Francis, but he needn't have expressed it by trashing Pope Benedict." I agree. Lombardi called the piece superficial journalism. Now, along the way, there is some solid biographical reporting, and then we are informed that Pope Francis is a political animal, capable of summoning that old authoritarian steel if it serves a higher purpose. At this point, I thought Rolling Stone was going to tell us about Pope Francis authorizing the continuing investigation of a major group of American nuns for their embrace of radical feminist themes, which is true. Or perhaps the Pope's excommunication of an Australian priest last September who had advocated gay marriage and female clergy. Nope, nary a word about any of that. Instead, we're led to believe that Pope Francis is cracking down on so-called hyper-traditionalist religious and cardinals. The Rolling Stone article quotes from my recent interview with Cardinal Raymond Burke, writing erroneously, quote, "Burke later became the only clergyman of any serious stature willing to publicly criticize Pope Francis." He didn't. Telling a Catholic television network, thanks for the attribution, Mark, "One gets the impression, or," and this is the quote of Cardinal Burke, "one gets the impression, or it's interpreted this way in the media, that he thinks we're talking too much about abortion, too much about the integrity of marriage as between one man and one woman, but we can never talk enough about that," end quote. A week later, Francis essentially sacked Burke, the article continues, removing him from his post on the influential Vatican Congregation of Bishops. Now, fact check. If the Pope wanted to sack Cardinal Burke, he did a really bad job. Cardinal Burke is head of the Apostolic Signatura, the Vatican Supreme Court. He also serves on a number of influential congregations at the Holy See, including the Secretariat of State. Had he been removed as prefect of the Signatura or bounced from his various congregation posts, then you could say he was sacked. But being confirmed, or not confirmed in this case, at one congregation is hardly a sacking. All of which brings us back to the main point here. If you want to know what the Pope is really doing, what he's really saying, what's really going on, turning to places like Rolling Stone is not likely to get you very far. But perhaps that's why we're here. Though the picture on the cover was very nice. Well, that is all the time we have. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. The links are on my website. By the way, if you sign up for the free e-blast, I'll send you exclusive content and the latest news. Go to the center of the web page at raymondarroyo.com. I'll also send you a link of this week's show in case you missed any of it. And don't miss next week. We've got some serious star power. As the Olympics start in Sochi, we'll talk with three-time gold medal gymnast Dominique Dawes. And Roma Downey and Mark Burnett will be here in studio. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. From Washington, D.C., we'll see you next time. Bye now.